January 12th, 1993. Whitney Houston was about to sing for 15,000 people when her voice cracked on the first note. What Eddie Van Halen did next, walking onto that stage uninvited, became the most legendary 8 minutes in live music history. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment if you remember watching the American Music Awards that year. It was the American Music Awards at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, and Whitney Houston was at the absolute peak of her powers. I Will Always Love You had been dominating radio for 12 straight weeks. The song from The Bodyguard had become a cultural phenomenon. Tonight, 15,000 people packed into the venue, and millions more watching on television were about to witness what was supposed to be the performance of the year. But backstage in dressing room C, something was going terribly wrong. Whitney's vocal coach Maria Henderson had noticed it during the warm-up session 2 hours before showtime. The rasp appeared on the first run-through. "Whitney, your upper register sounds strained," Maria said carefully, knowing how the superstar would react to any suggestion of vocal problems. She'd worked with Whitney for 5 years and knew the signs of vocal fatigue. "I'm fine," Whitney insisted, running through her scales one more time. Her mother, Sissy, had taught her these exercises when she was just a girl singing in the church choir. But when she hit the high notes this time, there was an unmistakable rasp that shouldn't have been there. It felt like sandpaper in her throat. "It's just the dry air in here. I'll be fine once I'm on stage. I always am." But Maria saw the fear flicker across Whitney's face. They'd done 6 performances in 8 days. Whitney's voice was her instrument, her identity, her entire world. And tonight, for the biggest television performance of the year, it was betraying her. Dr. Patricia Chen, the show's medical consultant, was called to Whitney's dressing room. After a brief examination, her face grew serious. "Your vocal cords are inflamed, possibly from the back-to-back performances you've been doing. You really shouldn't perform tonight." Whitney's eyes flashed with determination. 15,000 people bought tickets. Millions are watching at home. I'm not canceling. What Whitney didn't know was that seated in the audience, in an unremarkable seat in section 203, was Eddie Van Halen. He wasn't scheduled to perform, wasn't presenting an award, and most people had no idea he was even there. He'd bought a ticket like anyone else because his 16-year-old son Wolfgang was a massive Whitney Houston fan and had begged his father to take him to see her live. Wolfgang had been going through a difficult year. The pressure of being Eddie Van Halen's son, the expectations, the comparisons, it had been weighing on him. He'd found solace in Whitney's music. Her voice made him feel understood in ways he couldn't explain. When he'd asked his father to get tickets, Eddie had seen it as more than just a concert. It was a chance to connect with his son through something Wolfgang loved. "Dad, this is going to be incredible," Wolfgang whispered as the lights began to dim. His hands were actually shaking with excitement. "She's got the greatest voice in the world." Eddie smiled at his son's enthusiasm, seeing the joy in Wolfgang's eyes that had been missing for months. As a guitarist who'd revolutionized rock music, he appreciated mastery in any form. And Whitney Houston was undeniably a master of her instrument, that otherworldly voice that could make grown men weep and stadiums erupt in simultaneous goosebumps. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, performing the biggest song in the world, Whitney Houston." The crowd exploded. Spotlight hit the stage. Whitney walked out in an elegant white gown, radiating the confidence that had made her a superstar. She took her position at the microphone, closed her eyes, and as the orchestral introduction swelled around her, she opened her mouth to sing the opening line of "I Will Always Love You." Nothing came out. She tried again. This time a sound emerged, but it was wrong. Her voice cracked, painfully, publicly. The crack echoed through the sound system, magnified for all 15,000 people and millions of television viewers to hear. The orchestra stumbled, uncertain whether to continue or stop. Whitney's eyes, visible on the massive screens flanking the stage, showed something the world had never seen before. Pure panic. The invincible Whitney Houston, the voice, was breaking down in real time. "I can't," she whispered into the microphone, the words carrying across the now silent auditorium. "I'm so sorry. I can't." But then something impossible happened. From section 203, a guitar riff cut through the silence. It was unmistakable, the opening notes of Van Halen's Eruption, but played slower, gentler, transformed into something that sounded like a prayer. Every head in the auditorium turned. There, standing in the aisle with a guitar that seemed to have materialized from nowhere, was Eddie Van Halen. His son Wolfgang sat frozen, watching his father do something completely unplanned, completely spontaneous. Security guards started moving toward Eddie, unsure what was happening. But Eddie was already walking down the aisle, his fingers dancing across the fretboard, transforming his signature guitar pyrotechnics into something beautiful and supportive. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or stay silent. They chose silence, sensing they were witnessing something beyond a scripted awards show. Eddie climbed the steps to the stage. Whitney stood frozen at the microphone, tears streaming down her face. When Eddie reached her, he said just 3 words, "I got you." Then he began playing the melody of "I Will Always Love You" on his guitar. But this wasn't some rock interpretation or genre-bending arrangement. Eddie Van Halen, the man who'd redefined what an electric guitar could do, was playing Whitney's vocal line, note for note, phrase for phrase, as if his guitar had become her voice. Whitney's eyes widened. She understood. This wasn't about Eddie showing off his technical prowess. He was literally lending her his instrument to sing the parts her voice couldn't reach. He was completing her performance, filling in the gaps, becoming her safety net. She took a breath and began singing again. When she reached the first high note that had cracked before, she pulled back, and Eddie's guitar soared upward, nailing the note with pure sustain. The audience gasped. What happened next was pure magic, unrehearsed, unprecedented, and absolutely perfect. Whitney would sing a phrase, and Eddie's guitar would answer like a conversation between old friends. When she needed to rest her voice, his guitar carried the melody with such tenderness that it felt like an embrace. When she found strength to push forward, he shifted into harmony, supporting rather than replacing, always listening, always responding. The audience sat transfixed. Some were crying. Others had their hands over their mouths. Music journalists frantically scribbled notes. Camera operators zoomed in on the connection between Whitney and Eddie, 2 masters finding perfect synchronization without rehearsal. During the bridge, where Whitney would normally have unleashed her legendary vocal runs that had made her famous, she instead created new patterns, softer and more intimate. And Eddie matched her, his fingers flying across the fretboard in runs that mirrored and complemented her voice like a shadow that had learned to sing. Rock and soul, guitar and vocals, 2 completely different musical languages finding perfect common ground in real time. The orchestra, which had been uncertain at first, now swelled behind them, following their lead. The conductor had tears streaming down his face as he guided his musicians through this spontaneous reimagining of one of the biggest songs in the world. In section 203, Wolfgang Van Halen was crying. "Dad saw she needed help," he whispered. "My dad always knows when someone needs help." When the final chorus arrived, the moment where Whitney would typically deliver the performance's emotional climax with that impossible sustained high note, she looked at Eddie. They both knew her voice couldn't handle it, but together they created something more powerful. Whitney sang the note as high as she could safely go, pouring emotion into it, and Eddie's guitar lifted the melody higher, sustaining it with such sweet tone that it became impossible to tell where her voice ended and his guitar began. The final note rang out, a perfect blend of voice and guitar, soul and rock, vulnerability and strength. For 3 seconds, the note hung in the air. Then Eddie and Whitney both released it at exactly the same moment. Silence. Then the Shrine Auditorium exploded. All 15,000 people leaped to their feet. The standing ovation lasted 12 minutes. Other artists backstage were openly weeping. Camera operators wiped their eyes while trying to keep their shots steady. Eddie set his guitar down and reached for the microphone. His voice was thick with emotion. 20 years I've been playing guitar. I've played in front of millions of people. I've written songs that top the charts. But tonight I learned what music really is. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. This woman just taught me that. When she needed help, we made music together. That's what it's supposed to be. Whitney took the microphone, tears still streaming. I walked out here tonight thinking I had to be Whitney Houston, the voice, the superstar, the woman who never makes mistakes. And when I failed, when my voice cracked and I couldn't hit the notes, I thought my career was over." She turned to Eddie. "Then this man showed me that music isn't about one voice. It's about voices, plural. It's about helping each other. He didn't save my performance. He showed me what performance really means." The audience erupted again. But in section 203, something else was happening. A 17-year-old girl named Sarah Thompson, who'd been battling leukemia for 14 months and was there on what her doctors had told her family would likely be one of her last outings, turned to her mother with tears streaming down her face. Sarah had stopped treatment 2 weeks earlier. The chemotherapy wasn't working. Her parents had sold their car to afford this night, one final beautiful memory before the end. Her mother had dressed her in the wig that Sarah hated, had helped her apply makeup to hide how sick she was. They'd come to see perfection, to see the voice at her peak, to have one moment of transcendent beauty before facing what came next. Instead, they'd witnessed something far more powerful. They'd seen vulnerability transformed into triumph. They'd seen failure becoming art. They'd seen two broken things, Whitney's voice and Eddie's awareness of her struggle, creating something more perfect than either could have made alone. "Mom," Sarah said, gripping her mother's hand so tightly it hurt. "Did you see what just happened?" Her voice broke. She failed in front of everybody. His was just a guitar. It shouldn't have been able to fix it. And they made something more beautiful than either could make alone. Her mother was crying too hard to respond. "That's what I need to remember," Sarah continued, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'm broken right now. The doctors say I'm failing. But broken things can still make beautiful music. Maybe I just need to find my guitar player, my harmony. I'm not done yet. I'm not ready to stop fighting." Sarah Thompson would live 7 more years, far beyond any medical prediction. She returned to treatment the next week with a new perspective. Her journal, published after her death and used in hospitals around the world, would include this entry about that night. "When Whitney's voice failed and Eddie's guitar answered, I realized that my value isn't in being perfect or whole or cured. It's in finding harmony with whatever and whoever can help me make music out of my brokenness. That's when I decided to keep fighting. Not to be perfect, but to be present. To make whatever music I still can for however long I have." The performance became legendary immediately. Bootleg recordings traded for hundreds of dollars. Rolling Stone called it the most important live music moment of the decade. The Grammy Awards created a new category, Best Cross-Genre Live Performance. But the real impact was more personal. Whitney Houston and Eddie Van Halen became lifelong friends. They spoke on the phone monthly. When Eddie was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2000s and faced brutal treatment, Whitney privately recorded gospel songs for him to listen to during chemotherapy. "When I'm in that chair getting treatment," Eddie told his son Wolfgang, "I put on Whitney's songs and I remember that night. I remember that being broken doesn't mean being finished. It means finding new ways to make music." In one of his final interviews before his death in 2020, Eddie was asked about his greatest musical moment. He didn't mention stadium tours or hit records or being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. "January 12th, 1993, he said without hesitation, "walking down that aisle to help Whitney. That was the moment I understood why I was given the gift of playing guitar. Not to show off, not to be famous, but to help someone make music when they couldn't do it alone." Whitney's daughter, Bobby Christina, after her mother's death, found recordings in Whitney's personal archive. They were demos of songs Whitney and Eddie had planned to record together, an album called When Rock Met Soul that never happened because of schedules and life getting in the way. In 2025, those recordings were released posthumously. The album debuted at #1, and all proceeds went to music therapy programs for sick children, a legacy that both artists would have wanted. The story of that night reminds us that the greatest performances aren't about perfection. They're about presence. They're about showing up for each other. They're about understanding that sometimes the most beautiful music happens when someone's voice breaks and someone else's instrument becomes their voice. Eddie Van Halen didn't plan to perform that night. He wasn't scheduled, wasn't prepared, wasn't expecting to do anything but watch his son's favorite singer perform. But when he saw someone in trouble, someone whose gift was failing them in their moment of greatest need, he did what any true musician would do. He picked up his guitar and said, "I got you." And in doing so, he created a moment that transcended genre, fame, and everything except the pure human connection that makes music matter. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel for more incredible true stories about music's greatest legends. Hit that like button if you believe music is about connection, not perfection. And drop a comment telling us about a time when someone showed up for you when you needed it most. Because that's what this story is really about. It's not about Whitney Houston or Eddie Van Halen. It's about all of us, finding the moments when we can be someone's guitar when their voice fails, or someone's voice when our guitar isn't enough. Sometimes the greatest music happens when we stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be present. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness or create 8 minutes that change everything.